Karen demands VIP table claiming to know the owner, but I'm the owner, and she was left crying with a $4,000 bill after my revenge. When we're overwhelmed, I step in as a server, ensuring that everything runs smoothly. That's exactly what I was doing when Karen stormed in, demanding the VIP table. She was loud, entitled, and clearly trying to intimidate the staff. She threw around the classic "I know the owner" line, insisting that she and her group deserve special treatment. The irony, of course, was that I am the owner, and I had never seen this woman in my life. Instead of calling her out immediately, I decided to play along and see just how far she would take it. I welcomed them warmly, pretending to check my reservation list and finding a table for them. It wasn't the VIP section, but I assured her it was one of our best spots. The entire group carried themselves with arrogance, treating the staff like servants and making absurd requests. But the real moment of insult came when one of the girls looked at me and asked if I ever felt like my life was meaningless because I was just a waiter. That's when I decided it was time for payback. I had spent years pouring my soul into this restaurant, rebuilding my family's legacy from the ground up. This entitled group had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. I signaled to my staff to give them the special treatment. Their orders were subtly delayed, their drinks slightly watered down, and their requests accidentally mixed up. When it came time for the check, I personally delivered it, along with a printed copy of our restaurant's history, featuring a photo of me as the owner. Karen's face turned red as she realized the truth. I smiled and said, "Oh, and since you know the owner so well, I'm sure you won't mind paying full price, plus a generous tip for the hardworking staff." Without another word, they paid and left, humiliated. The staff and I shared a knowing look, and I went back to doing what I do best, running the restaurant that I built with my own 2 hands. Things like, "Do you even know who I am?" At this point, I had heard enough. Still keeping my cool, I replied, "Ma'am, I completely understand, but unfortunately, without a reservation, we simply have no tables available." I gestured towards the crowded dining area, showing her the packed restaurant. She scoffed. "That's ridiculous. The owner and I go way back. Just give me a table before I have to call him." I decided to play along. "Oh, of course. I'd love to accommodate you. Let me just check with the owner real quick." I pulled out my phone, pretending to send a message. After a moment, I smiled. "Good news. The owner is already here." Her eyes lit up, and she smirked as if she had won. "Great. Now, tell him Karen is here and to get me a table." I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you, Karen. I'm the owner." The shift in her expression was priceless. Her smug confidence melted into confusion, and then pure embarrassment. The girls behind her started whispering among themselves, slowly realizing what had just happened. After a brief silence, she tried to recover. "Oh, well, maybe you don't remember me. We've met before." I shook my head. "I don't think so." She stammered, looking for a way out. "Well, this is a misunderstanding. We'll just go somewhere else." I nodded. "That's probably best." With that, Queen Bee Karen and her group shuffled out, their heads low. The staff, who had been watching the whole exchange, shared a few amused glances before getting back to work. As they left, one of the younger girls hesitated for a second, then turned back and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I just smiled and nodded. Some people learn their lesson the hard way. Expensive cocktails and top-shelf liquor they had been ordering without a second thought. By the time they were done, their bill was astronomical. When I brought the check over, Queen Bee Karen, still a bit tipsy but confident, lazily waved her hand. "Just put it on my card." "It's fine." I nodded. "Of course, ma'am." A few moments later, I returned with her card and a receipt. She took one look at the total, and her smug expression instantly vanished. "What? This is a mistake. There's no way it costs this much." Feigning concern, I tilted my head. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you not realize that the VIP table has a high minimum spend? And after the first 3 rounds, all drinks are charged at our premium rate. You ordered quite a few." She flipped through the receipt, her face turning red as she saw the charges for all the luxury drinks they had happily consumed. The baby Karen started whispering nervously, realizing they were in deep trouble. This is ridiculous. I want to speak to the owner," she screeched. I gave her a slow smile. "Karen, I am the owner. Remember? For the second time that night, she was completely stunned into silence. "But, you said," she stammered, scrambling for a way out. I shrugged. "I said the first 3 rounds were free. Everything else is clearly itemized on your receipt." One of her friends leaned in and whispered, "Karen, I don't have that kind of money." Panic set in. "There has to be something you can do," she pleaded. I sighed, pretending to think about it. "Well, considering how much of a hard time you gave me earlier, I could waive the VIP table charge, but that still leaves the drinks and food." Her eyes darted between her giggling, whispering friends and the enormous bill in front of her. With no other choice, she begrudgingly handed over her card. The payment went through. With a huff, she grabbed her receipt and stormed out, dragging her group behind her. As the door closed behind them, my staff burst into quiet laughter. One server nudged me. "That was brutal." I just grinned. Some lessons are expensive cocktails and top-shelf liquor they had been ordering without a second thought. By the time they were done, their bill was astronomical. When I brought the check over, Queen Bee Karen, still a bit tipsy but confident, lazily waved her hand. "Just put it on my card." "It's fine." I nodded. "Of course, ma'am." A few moments later, I returned with her card and a receipt. She took one look at the total, and her smug expression instantly vanished. "What? This is a mistake. There's no way it costs this much." Feigning concern, I tilted my head. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you not realize that the VIP table has a high minimum spend? And after the first 3 rounds, all drinks are charged at our premium rate. You ordered quite a few." She flipped through the receipt, her face turning red as she saw the charges for all the luxury drinks they had happily consumed. The baby Karens started whispering nervously, realizing they were in deep trouble. This is ridiculous. "I want to speak to the owner," she screeched. I gave her a slow smile. "Karen, I am the owner. Remember?" For the second time that night, she was completely stunned into silence. "But, you said," she stammered, scrambling for a way out. I shrugged. "I said the first 3 rounds were free. Everything else is clearly itemized on your receipt." One of her friends leaned in and whispered, "Karen, I don't have that kind of money." Panic set in. "There has to be something you can do," she pleaded. I sighed, pretending to think about it. "Well, considering how much of a hard time you gave me earlier, I could waive the VIP table charge, but that still leaves the drinks and food." Her eyes darted between her giggling, whispering friends and the enormous bill in front of her. With no other choice, she begrudgingly handed over her card. The payment went through. With a huff, she grabbed her receipt and stormed out, dragging her group behind her. As the door closed behind them, my staff burst into quiet laughter. One server nudged me. "That was brutal." I just grinned. Some lessons are expensive, but I had already thought ahead. Since I had taken her credit card and ID at the beginning of the night, she had no way of leaving without paying. Her friends sat in stunned silence, whispering about how much trouble they were in. A few of them pulled out their phones, probably checking their bank balances. After a few minutes, Queen Bee Karen returned, looking pale. This is insane," she muttered, still hoping for an escape. I remained professional. "Is there an issue with the bill? Everything you ordered is listed. If there's a mistake, I'd be happy to go over it with you." She clenched her jaw. "No, I didn't realize," one of the baby Karens hesitantly spoke up. "Karen, I don't have enough to cover my part." Now visibly frustrated, Queen Bee glared at her friends. "You all drank just as much as I did. You better have something to contribute." In the end, they pulled together what they could, and Queen Bee Karen was left covering the majority of the bill. Her hands shook slightly as she handed me her card. I swiped it. Declined. She laughed nervously. "Try it again." Declined. Panic set in. This has to be a mistake. "Do you have another form of payment?" I asked politely, though internally, I was enjoying this far too much. Red-faced, she scrambled for another card. This one went through, barely. Snatching the receipt, she muttered, "Let's go," and stormed out with her humiliated squad trailing behind her. As they left, one of my servers whispered, "That was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen." I just smiled. Some lessons in humility come with a price. Without making it too obvious, I subtly reminded her that we had her ID and credit card, just in case she was thinking of running out. About 10 minutes later, she returned, her makeup freshly done but her eyes still red from crying. She immediately launched into complaints about how awful the food and drinks were, demanding that I at least cut the bill in half. Despite originally claiming the night was on her, she now suggested that her friends pitch in. Then, as if struck by sudden inspiration, she once again mentioned her supposed connection to the owner, as if that would persuade me to lower the bill. I simply smiled and said, "No. Just no." Desperate, she pulled out her phone and showed me a series of texts from a contact labeled with my restaurant's name followed by the word owner. It didn't take long for me to realize what she had done. She had likely gone to the bathroom, changed the contact name of one of her friends, and deleted old messages to fabricate a fake conversation. I glanced at the messages, clicked on the contact details, and told her flatly, "That's not the owner's number." She quickly retorted that the owner had multiple phones for business, insisting that I wouldn't know them all. I countered, "How about we call him? If he confirms, I'll knock 50% off the bill." Instead of agreeing, she exploded, yelling loud enough to grab the attention of the remaining patrons. That was my cue to end this charade. In a firm tone, I cut her off. "Enough. You don't know the owner, and you've never been here before. If you keep this up, I'll call the police." Her entire demeanor shifted as she scrambled for an excuse. But I was done playing along. I stared her down and said, "My grandfather founded this restaurant. My family has run it for generations. I've spent most of my life here, and I am the sole owner. I've never seen you before, never heard of you, and I certainly never promised you anything." That night, the little Karens were stunned, frozen in place with no idea how to react. Queen Bee, on the other hand, was in tears. I calmly continued, "I gave you exactly what you asked for, a VIP table, usually reserved for high-end guests, which I didn't charge you for. I also comped your first 3 rounds of drinks. But if you don't pay your bill now, I will have no choice but to call the police and hand over your ID." Defeated, Karen signed the bill while sobbing. Her minions scrambled to pull out whatever cash they had, handing it over in small amounts with promises to pay her back later. 2 days later, an angry man stormed into my restaurant, demanding to speak with a bartender. I was in the back office working, so he had to wait about 30 minutes. When I finally met him, Queen Bee was with him, her head hanging low. I led them both to my office and played security footage from the night in question. Since the VIP area had high-quality audio due to previous incidents, every remark, order, and conversation was crystal clear. When the video finished, the man, presumably her father, looked at her in disbelief before storming out, yelling at her the entire way. I haven't seen or heard from any of them since. As a small reminder of that night, I framed the original bill, minus the $120 oysters, and keep it on my desk. Interestingly, I didn't actually lose as much money on this ordeal as you might think. The VIP table was going to remain empty anyway, so there was no actual revenue loss. And while the first 3 rounds of drinks were on the house, the rest of their expensive orders more than made up for it. So, now that you've heard the full story, was I the jerk here? Maybe. But what still amazes me most isn't just their entitled attempt to muscle their way into a table or dodge the bill, but their entire attitude toward the situation. That one statement from the baby Karen, asking if OP felt his life was meaningless because he was just a waiter, really stood out. It seemed like OP was about to ease up on his entire revenge plan, but that remark pushed him over the edge. The sheer entitlement in that comment is astonishing. We've seen some wild stories on this channel, but the fact that she actually views the world this way is disturbing. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a job, no matter the income or position. This kind of arrogance is often directed at janitors, servers, and other hard-working individuals, and it's infuriating. A job doesn't define a person's worth, but she clearly thought it did, and even went so far as to mock OP for what she assumed was a lowly position. That being said, I'm glad this story had a somewhat satisfying ending. The father's reaction, shifting his anger toward his daughter rather than the restaurant, was the justice OP deserved. The only part that threw me off was the fact that the VIP section had audio recording. If I knew a restaurant was recording conversations at my table, I'd probably think twice about dining there. But in the end, OP got the last laugh. What do you think? If this were your restaurant, how would you have handled the situation? Was OP the jerk, or did the Karens get exactly what they deserved? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more shocking real-life stories.